welcome everybody to our lecture today on Chapter 10, Structural Search and Rescue for the Essentials of Firefighting, 7th edition. We're going to do some discussion about these topics today, and we're going to accomplish some objectives. We're going to hit some specific things. In specific, we're going to talk about our best practices for firefighter survival during interior operations. We're also going to address structural search and rescue operations. We're going to talk about victim removal methods, and then we're going to take a written assessment of this material, and then we're going to go out into the gear room. We're going to practice the Firefighter 1 and 2 practical skills for lifts and carries in primary and secondary search. My name is Joe Resch. I'll be your instructor today. Just a couple of ground rules for the class. We're going to go for about 30 or 40 minutes, then we'll take a 10-minute break. If at all possible, I'd like to have electronic devices away, stowed, so that we don't have any distractions from us during this portion. So gentlemen in the front, if you wouldn't mind putting your phone up, I'd appreciate that very much. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind putting that in your pocket entirely, that'd be great. Excellent. Okay, so does anybody have any questions leading off before we get started here? Okay, so like I said, our objectives today, we're going to talk about firefighter survival, structural search, victim removal methods, and we're going to do some practical skills. My job as the instructor is to make sure that you understand this material, but also to motivate you to want to be the best at it. So hopefully we can deliver this information in a way that resonates with you. So our very first learning objective today is going to be explaining best practices to ensure firefighter survival during interior operations. So remember this objective because we're going to be coming back to this through review questions and things throughout this process till we get to our next objective. So to ensure firefighter survival, we've got to be really good at doing 3 different things. The first thing we want to be good at doing is recognizing potential hazards. We want to be able to escape unavoidable hazards because that is part of our job. We're going to come across things that we can't escape. It's just part of what we do. We've got to be smart and able enough to get past that. And we also need to be able to rescue lost or trapped firefighters. That's a very important part of our job as well. We don't just take care of the general public. We take care of ourselves as well. So as it relates to situational awareness, when you're talking about search and rescue operations, you want to be mindful of conditions to the search and rescue operations that you should communicate, either amongst yourself and your crew and to the incident commander. So one of those things is the location and the extent of the fire. You may be assigned search instead of fire attack, but if you go in as a search crew, you may encounter fire. You may be in first before the fire attack team. If you are able to relay that information to command or to another crew inside, you should do that. Changes in the heat level will be very apt information to be communicating as well. If you're searching and you find yourself getting hotter and hotter and hotter, you know there's a TAC team in there and it doesn't seem to be getting any better, you may communicate that because they may not be reaching the seat of the fire or they may not be making an effective fire attack at all. If you note that the fire behavior is spreading and growing, also communicate that because that means that something is probably either not happening or going wrong somewhere else inside that structure. When your visibility level changes or gets better, that's a communication point as well. If you enter the structure with smoke banked down to maybe shoulder level, and after 5 minutes of searching, smoke is now down to your knees, and you have to physically get yourself down to the floor, you may relay that conditions are not improving. Conversely, if you enter a structure with 0 visibility, and through your search you find that the neutral plane has lifted and now the smoke is lifting out, you may communicate that to command that things are improving inside. Smoke color and the change of all the things about it, velocity, direction, things like that, are also worthy of noting. The Art of Reading Smoke is a good class to take if you've never taken it before to help you understand what you might be seeing. If you see turbulent black smoke, you know that something's burning very aggressively around you and it's pressurizing that space. Whereas if you saw, say, a wispier white smoke, that may be indicative of extinguishment, or maybe brown smoke indicating structural involvement. So those are all things to keep yourself abreast of as you're doing that. I apologize for that. Also be aware of the location and numbers of victims or occupants in the structure. So we don't always know the answer to that. Sometimes we're limited to information that we may know from notes from dispatch. So caller states there's someone trapped in the house. Caller states everybody's out. You may fall into that trap of thinking that just because the caller states everybody out, that means that there's nobody in there. As far as the fire service is concerned, that space or that compartment is not clear of victims until we say it is. You just never know. For instance, family of 4, fire starts in the house, everybody comes out, mom calls 911 and says everybody's out. Well, she didn't know that her son had stuck a girl over and that there was a girl inside the house. You know, of course the parents wouldn't know that, but there is a fifth person inside that house that nobody knows about except for one person. So that's a good place to start, but it's not the end-all be-all. Be aware of your starting and available air supply. You as a firefighter should know roughly how much time you can get out of your bottle at moderate, light, and medium intensities of work. And also, when we come in for shift change, of course, we always check our SCBAs. We note if the bottle is full or not, so you should know more or less before you enter that structure that you've got the requisite air supply because you checked it before it's ever been used. And then also be aware of safe havens and alternate exit routes. We'll talk a little bit more about safe havens as we progress through the lecture, so don't worry too much about that right now. And then also, from a situational awareness perspective, understand the indications of ceiling and floor collapse. Firefighter Hines, can you give me a potential indication of a floor collapse?
The floor is spongy. It's not a solid ground that you're crawling or walking on.
That's a great answer. That's very accurate. That can be indicative of compromise of the structural members of the floor joists. Not only a spongy floor, but maybe a sagging floor. If you can visually look in that room when you do your live fire layout from that ground level, and you see the floor is sagging, that's also an indicator. So not just the feel, but the physical look of it is also something to keep in mind as well. So let's review real quick. Captain Roberts, can you tell me a condition that you would consider reporting to another team member and a supervisor during a search and rescue operation?
Changing smoke conditions.
Excellent. Very good answer. Very good answer. Firefighter Moore, can you give me another condition that should be reported to other team members?
Increasing heat levels.
Awesome. Excellent. Those are two very correct answers to that question. To prepare yourself for survival as a firefighter in the hostile environment, you need to practice sound firefighting techniques. Practice situational awareness. We just talked about a lot of the things that encompass that. So that one bullet point right there encompasses 5 minutes of discussion alone, and that's not the end-all be-all. Anticipate types of survival situations that you may face. If you are in an industrial facility or maybe even a grocery store, you should be thinking about the potential for not only collapse of the roof, but what if a shelving or aisle, what if an aisle shelving falls over? You're now trapped. You're not going to find that in a residential structure necessarily, but in a commercial structure, you may have large, looming, somewhat unsecured objects that with the right amount of force could topple over. So, you know, what's your game plan if you get in that kind of situation? If you're in a house that has significant fire involvement, you need to be wary that if you're entering a pit basement structure where the fire is in the basement, you may be contending with unstable floor conditions. Practice Mayday and self-rescue. At the Columbia Fire Department, we do a good job of continuing education with that. We try to do core competencies with Mayday several times a year so that we're really good at those UCAN reports and doing firefighter packaging and RIC scenarios. We're going to briefly touch on Mayday at several points during this presentation, but we're not going to get as in-depth as we will another day. Check your own and your team members' air supply. We typically check each other before we enter the structure, not just from a how buttoned up are you perspective. If I see my captain about to go in and he's missing a Nomex, I'm going to mention that. For whatever reason, I look down and I see his bottles showing 1,000 PSI instead of the 5,500 that he should, I'm going to mention that. Practice basic skills so they're automatic. That's what we do. We train so that all the things that we do are second nature, so that at 2 o'clock in the morning when we're not thinking, we're doing. Things that you can do to physically and mentally prepare yourself are train yourself for hazards that you might encounter, of course. It kind of goes without saying. Air management techniques are pretty critical here. So we do probably not enough of that, but something that you should do when you're out training, floating around the city or in your own station as a company is practice getting yourself to a point where you're really worked up, you're breathing really heavy, hit your vital alert and your SCBA, and then stop what you're doing and get your respiratory rate as low as possible and try to make that last third of your bottle last as long as possible. And if you've never done it before, which I know you have, you'll note that you can get sometimes up to an hour out of that last 1/3 of that bottle when you're really managing that air. And then practicing emergency exit techniques is pretty good too. So swimming through wall studs, pulling yourself out through a window, hanging from a window, things like that are all really good skills to prepare yourself for and practice as well. Make sure that your PPE matches the hazard and is working properly. So who can tell me a situation where you would want structural PPE? I'll give you the answer for that. Structural firefighting. Where would you absolutely not want structural firefighting PPE?
Next to the water.
Exactly, next to a water. So your PPE has to match the hazard and it needs to make sure that it's working properly. Understand your roles and responsibilities. As the officer, you are going to be more in charge of an objective view of that scenario. You may be operating the TIC, you may be directing crew members as the firefighter. You are going to be the one that's leading the search. You may be off on your own in visual, verbal, or physical contact. But understand your role in that scenario and understand your own physical limitations. You are not Superman. There's a limit to what you can do, but there are certainly things that you can do as well. Look out for the members of your crew. We operate as a crew. We don't do anything by ourselves. And if you see someone in trouble, you need to say something. You need to either be prepared to help them or communicate with somebody that can help them. Listen to your team members. If your captain gives you an order, follow that order. I think that's pretty succinct. Follow them thoughtfully. Ask for clarification if it doesn't sound right. So if your captain makes a 360 of the structure and you note that there's fire on the second floor of the structure, it may not, or I'm sorry, if it's on the ground level of the structure, it may not be prudent to go in and make the second floor right away because you've got fire burning underneath you and that's not a situation you want to be in. So tactfully ask, hey Cap, I noticed that the fire is burning on the first floor into the second floor. Are you sure you want us to enter the second floor of the structure? There may be a reason for it. Maybe there's an active rescue being made through VES, something like that. But bear that in mind, that just because someone says to do something, that doesn't mean that it is necessarily correct. PPE has specific limitations, and it will not protect you from all hazards during a search and rescue operation. Do you know what the weakest link in your PPE is as a firefighter?
Face mask.
Exactly. Your face mask is the weakest link in your PPE, and there are studies that are going to have more specific numbers than I can give you. But my understanding is that those can bubble, glaze, and melt between 300 and 400 degrees of prolonged exposure. So while your turnout gear may be much more resilient than that, your face piece is not, and your respiratory protection is arguably the most important part of your ensemble. So be aware of that. Continuing with our situational awareness, we kind of touched on this before, looking for key signs of fire behavior indicators, especially those associated with rapid fire development. So if you were to be searching down a hallway and you see flames rolling over the top of your head and you are nowhere near an attack team, that is not necessarily an indication that you have to leave the space right then and there if there's a room that you can enter as a safe haven and isolate. But you also need to be wary that that fire is coming towards you, and that room or that hallway or that compartment may flash before long. So listen, feel, and watch for changes in that environment. That's all part of being situationally aware. When you are in these situations, you are likely going to be experiencing obscured vision, which can lead to 4 different things. Typically, those will manifest in disorientation, fear, claustrophobia, and sometimes panic. Anyone that was new to this industry the first time that they were in a smoked out room in an SCBA probably felt this, because you're breathing off a system that's not normal. You've never been in that situation before, and you probably go through all of those phases in some order or another. But I think most people end in panic. They either just panic right off the get-go, or they go through disorientation, which leads to fear, which makes them feel claustrophobic, which makes them panic, or they just panic right off the get-go. So those are things that you may have to contend with. So be aware of that and put yourself in a mental place where that's not an issue for you. Sage advice to remain calm. A little easier said than done. Control your breathing. We talked about that. You can practice several different breathing techniques. There's skip breathing, breath holding, all sorts of things that you can do on your own time. Maintaining situational awareness. We've hit that pretty hard. Staying in contact with your partners. What are 3 ways that you can remain in contact with your crew, Captain Roberts?
Verbal, visual, right? And physical.
Absolutely. Those are the 3 ways that I would say you could stay in contact. If you can see, hear, or feel them, you're probably in pretty good shape. If not, someone at least knows where you are. Focus on your assigned task. If you're the search crew and something goes sideways or you encounter that fire, it's not your job to put the fire out at that point. Don't take the hose line from someone else. Isolate that compartment and search as close to the fire compartment as you can or in that fire compartment if conditions allow. Rely on your other senses. I am actually pretty guilty of this, so when I'm in a smoked out environment, for whatever reason, if I can't see anything or I can see minimal, for some reason I always close my eyes because I realize that there's nothing to see anyways. And I realize that's actually not a very smart thing to do. Just because I can't see in this moment right now doesn't mean that I need to try and heighten my other senses by taking away one of them. Sometimes there is something that you can see, or you can see enough to see something. And I wouldn't necessarily get in the habit of cutting off all of your senses. I would focus more on relying on them all. Sometimes I try to make things harder for myself by closing my eyes when I'm doing a training drill, but that's not always the best way to do things. That being said, when we practice the practical skills today, we are going to be operating in a zero visibility environment with obscuring of our masks. And seek professional assistance if you need it. So let's review. Who can tell me one action that a firefighter can take to better prepare themselves for survival in a hazardous condition? Anybody?
Be aware of your surroundings and take note of things that others may not have seen.
Awesome. Very, very good answer, Firefighter Hines. I love that. Does anybody else have an answer they'd like to volunteer? Yes, sir.
Know your equipment limitations.
Excellent. Outstanding. Because what is the weakest piece in our ensemble?
Face mask.
Outstanding. So I did mention we were going to talk about Mayday briefly. This is where we're going to kind of briefly cover that. This is in no way an all-inclusive Mayday presentation. We're just going to very quickly talk about it. These are not all of the situations in which someone can encounter a situation that we would qualify as a Mayday, but these are certainly some of them. So air emergencies, a firefighter that becomes lost or disoriented, firefighters that become entangled with the fire or structural environment, rapid fire development, and building collapse or a trapping of some sort are all scenarios in which you could find yourself calling a Mayday. And that's really as much as we're going to get into that right now. As far as the tenability of the environment, remember that an untenable environment may still be tenable for us. So it's not tenable for somebody that's dressed like this, but for somebody that's got a full PPE ensemble and an SCBA face piece that's on air, they are going to be much more able to handle that environment than someone else will. Ideal H would call it. If there's no evidence of structural collapse and the heat levels and the duration of operations are going to stay within the acceptable limits for that PPE and SBA, you can be in that environment. I wouldn't get you in the weeds of what those exact temperatures and time limits are, but if you're in a situation where the room is flashing, get out. But if you're in a situation where there's fire over in that corner of a room and contents, and there's smoke in that room, you have the ability to be in that room as long as you're able to be in that room until things progress to a point where you can no longer be in that room. You are able to determine the tenability of that space. Keep in mind the environment can change very quickly due to unexpected fire spread or temperature increase, which can also lead to structural instability and possible collapse. And also be wary of the buildup of smoke and products of combustion. Less of an issue for us as firefighters that are wearing SCBAs, but also a big issue for potential victims. Even if that space is compartmentalized and while we arrived, that space was tenable, that doesn't mean that in those 3 minutes that it took us to make entry and get to them, that they didn't have a breach of that door or that something didn't happen that caused all those IDLH environment gases into their space and has not compromised their lives. If the environment does become untenable, personnel need to be alerted. Personnel should evacuate or take shelter in a safe haven. Again, we'll define what a safe haven is later. The IC must be notified once all personnel evacuate or take shelter, and then they'll probably do some sort of personnel accountability report to make sure that all personnel on that fire scene are accounted for. Safe haven locations are going to be places that you can use as a survival zone, either for you or a potential victim. So if you look at this graphic here, we've got our firefighter hose team that's making their way to this room and contents fire here, and we've got what looks like 2 victims here. So possible safe havens for these folks are going to be the rooms that they're in, especially if we're able to isolate those compartments with doors. We can also use those spaces as safe havens for ourselves. So let's imagine a scenario where there's no victim here, or the victim's already been rescued by half that team, and now we are in a situation where we are not really making progress on this and it's getting out of control. Well, if we lose this room and it starts to flash on us, we can bail out of here and go into this safe haven and close that door behind us. That allows us to have the ability to buy some time, let that attack team gain control of the situation, or someone can get a ladder to the window in that room, and then we can bail out that way. So it'll also be really critical, safe havens will, when you talk about large commercial structures, pressurized, protected stairwells, hospitals, apartment complexes, things where we don't necessarily have the ability to make mass rescues, but we do have the ability to put people in one place and keep them safe for the time being while we do our jobs. Who can tell me a hazard that a firefighter must be prepared to face during an interior operation?
Quick change of conditions.
Very good. Very good. I love that. What's an example of a quickly changing condition?
If you go from, like we talked about earlier, that you start to feel the floor give out, or smoke conditions change and a room might flash when you're getting ready to make entry.
Absolutely. That's a very good answer. We'll talk about air management principles. I know we talked about that as far as techniques to maintain control of your psyche during some of these high-stress situations. So understand how much air you have left at any given time. What are the three ways that we can determine how much air we have left on us?
We have our Viber alert, we have the gauge at the bottom of our bottle, and then also on our chest, the meter.
Yes, and so actually, I need to amend myself. There would be 4 ways, because there's one other way that we can do that. And that would be exactly, Captain Roberts is pointing to his face, the HUD on your SCBA face piece regulator has those lights that visually alert us to what our air status is. So we can always have some idea of where we are. Know your point of no return, so understanding that once you get super deep into a structure, you may or may not have the air to get out. So especially if you consider that when you enter the structure, your respiratory situation for you personally is going to be different than when you've already made your way all the way deep into that structure, and now you got to get out. You probably are going to be breathing a lot heavier, you're going to be a lot more tired when you reach that point. So you can't look at it as, I've used half my air to get where I am now. Also considering the fact that we don't usually go much past our Viber alerts. So you can't look at it as, I've made it halfway, I'm good to go, this is my minimum safe distance. You have to know yourself how long you can make that last part of your bottle last. And for the sake of accountability, inform the incident commander if you have to exit the structure, either to recycle your bottles or change your tactic or to be reassigned after you made a rescue. No matter what, if you exit the structure, you always need to make sure that somebody knows where you are. Check your gauge before you enter the ideal H atmosphere. On our air packs, it's on our left shoulder. We can see our, I think it's actually on our right shoulder. We can see our remote gauge there. Anytime you're moving from one area to another, you can check that gauge. Okay, I see it looks like we've got a really big space in here in front of us to search. I'm sitting at 1/3 of my tank. I'm just about to hit Viber alert. We need to make the decision, are we going to make this room search, or are we going to have a crew come relieve us so that we can get out there? There's no necessarily hard and fast answer to that. That's a consideration that you need to make. Check your gauge after periods of heavy work. Baseline SOPs, you can check at specific intervals. For the Columbia Fire Department, we don't necessarily have hard and fast rules like that, but it's a good idea. Every so often, take a look at your gauge and see where you are, or look at your visual indicator. When you're resting, when you got idle time, check it then. Before you begin a new assignment, so that you understand whether or not you have the requisite air to complete that assignment. And then, whenever you've made it to your assigned area, be wary of your air situation there, because if you've used all your air to get to that spot, it might be time to ask for another crew to relieve you or help tag team with you. Point of no return is going to be based on how much air is required to exit the ideal H space. It's also going to be based on the lowest cylinder gauge reading of any individual team member. So you may have half a bottle left, but he may be down to his Viber alert. And we're not going to stay just because you have the air to make it. We're going to go because we work as a team, and I hesitate to use the phrase the weakest link, but the link that is the one that's going to cause the situation to change is the one that we're going to have to go off of. It doesn't mean weakest, but it does mean the first to reach that threshold. SOPs can also determine that, as well as environmental conditions. And then your team's physical and mental condition. A newer firefighter with less real-world experience may suck down a bottle a little faster than a veteran firefighter because they just may not be used to that amount of work, and they may not have been inside that situation before, and it's just a little much for them, so they may encounter that a little quicker. Air consumption can vary widely from individual to individual. I think that we know that. Somebody that's more fit is going to get more out of that bottle than somebody that's not fit. Cylinder is rated by its operating time. It is not an indicator of the actual operating time. So we talked about 60-minute bottles, 30-minute bottles, 45-minute bottles. By no means is that an official marking that that bottle should be this long. It's a rough guideline for what you should be able to do based on the work that you're doing. We'll talk a little bit about air management in an emergency. So never leave your team, never leave a team member in the hazard zone. There's no crew continuity when you do either of those things. And then again, we've talked about this a lot, maintain communication with the incident commander or a supervisor whenever you're experiencing air management emergencies. There are possible solutions to emergencies that you may find yourself experiencing. If you do find yourself having an air emergency, stay low to the ground and ensure that your cylinder valve is actually open so that it didn't get caught up on something or spun. And then operate the bypass valve only as you need and as directed by SOPs. So of course, if you need to take a breath, pop your bypass valve. If your cylinder is malfunctioning in some way, or if your demand regulator is malfunctioning, you can use that manual bypass valve. You can use air sharing techniques that equipment and SOPs allow. Captain Roberts, can you give us an example of one air sharing technique that we have access to in the fire department?
Buddy breathing.
Absolutely. Buddy breathing is one. Firefighter Hines, are you familiar with any other air sharing techniques that we can use?
We could, if the situation called for it, hot filling someone's bottle off a rig pack.
Absolutely. Those are the exact two scenarios that I'm envisioning, is buddy breathing and using the Rick bottle to hot fill a bottle and equalize those out. Give them a little more air, give them a little shot of air. If you get trapped or disoriented, remember to stay calm, activate your PASS device, and control your breathing until rescue arrives. We talk here about activating your PASS after that Mayday transmission. So if there's no ability to make a transmission, activate your PASS device. If you are able to make that transmission, wait until you've made that transmission until you do activate your PASS. Otherwise, the incident commander won't be able to make heads or tails of what you're actually saying. If your regulator is inoperable and the air is still in your cylinder, of course, I think I kind of touched on this, you can open up that bypass valve to provide positive pressure and breathe directly from that cylinder. So if the regulator is not functioning and it's not sensing the negative pressure that you're creating to give positive pressure, you can use that valve to give yourself a shot of air. If the air runs out before a rescue team arrives and there are no other options, you can break the seal on your mask and you can take air as needed. However, be aware that if there are IDLH gases in that space that you're in, you may be taking the gulp of toxic gas that may make you pass out and give you a toxic level of something or other that you may not come back from. So that is truly an absolute last resort. But I think we also need to recognize as human beings that at some point survival instinct kicks in. And I don't think many functioning, conscious humans are going to allow themselves to suffocate. They're going to reflexively reach for that. So that may be something that is a potential option. And in the right environment, it's not good for you, but it may not be fatal. But absolutely remember that it could be. So if you're having an air emergency, try to shelter yourself in the IDLH if necessary or possible. I do think that all of us know here, I think that kind of goes without saying, we wouldn't allow ourselves to have an air emergency right at the seat of the fire if we had the ability to get away from it. But nonetheless, we are going to talk about that. 3 principles to airway management, or to air management. So I'll give you one. One is know the limits of your bottle. Who can tell me, or sorry, the time of your bottle? Who can tell me another principle of air management?
Know the limitations of yourself and your crew.
Very good. Very good. Understanding the limitation of yourself and your crew is a very succinct and apt answer. So if you're going to shelter in place in an air emergency, transmit your mayday, remain calm and control breathing. Of course, it's easier said than done. Go to an uninvolved nearby room if possible and close the door so that we can separate ourselves from the fire. Shine a light, make noise, draw attention. That is not an all-inclusive list. You're not limited to that. You can do whatever you've got to do because it's your life on the line here. And continue to communicate as long as you can. Activate your PASS device. Listen for sounds or clues that will provide your location. For instance, well actually let me ask, what would be a sound that you might hear going on around you that might give you some idea of where you are? Yeah.
If you hear water and hoses flowing, you know that there's a fire attack crew somewhere in your vicinity.
Exactly. That would be my exact thought, is if I don't know where I am, but I can hear water rushing, my Mayday transmission is going to include something that indicates that I don't know where I am, but I can hear the water stream, so I know that I'm somewhere near that fire attack team. Very good. Okay, what action should we take if it's necessary to shelter in place? What's one thing that we can do? We enter the room and we do what with the door?
Isolate, shut the door.
Excellent. Very good. So I appreciate you guys' patience so far. It's been a little bit of a slug so far. Let's take 10 minutes. Let's stretch our legs. Let's get some water if we need to. Use the restroom. At this point, I'm going to pause my video to allow for that 10-minute break, and we'll pick up from there.